Hi, I'm Rebecca, and this is Tips and Strategies for Teaching Precalculus, and that's my website, hoffmath.com. First, a little bit about me. My name is Rebecca, like I said, and my business is Hoff Math, and I've been teaching high school math for 25 years, and I love to teach Precalculus. Thank you for getting your ticket to the Summer Math Summit. And don't forget to get your free resource, which is all of these slides with all of the links, as well as 2 free presentations for teaching the unit circle. They're both available in PowerPoint as well as Google Slides. So just click on the link below my video. Let's get started. Tip number 1, choose your topics wisely. Make sure that when you're deciding what to teach in your Precalculus class that you consider any district or state standards, any dual enrollment requirements if your class is dual enrollment or concurrent credit, the culture of the school, what's been taught in the past, what the students are like, what their goals are, the student's previous course, were they in an honors Algebra 2 or an on-level Algebra 2, did they take Algebra 2 in summer school, and the student's future. Are they going to take AP Calculus, non-AP Calculus, or are they just going to be graduating high school? If you'd like to know what I teach in Precalculus, click on that link there for what to teach in Precalculus, and I'll take you to one of my blog posts. Number 2, try to find some real-world applications. Precalculus tends to be kind of a hodgepodge of topics that don't really work well together, but they're just taught in order to prepare the students for calculus, hence why it's called Precalculus. So try to find ways where the topics can relate to the real world, like exponential growth and decay, law of sines, cosines, graphs of sine and cosine, and that can give the material a bit more meaning to the students. Number 3, having said that, some of the topics tend to be rather abstract and it's very difficult to find real-world applications, like the factor theorem of polynomials, properties of logarithms. These tend to be topics where you're just sort of learning to manipulate symbols and having to learn what the rules are. Some topics show the beauty and the power of mathematics, like polar graphs and Pascal's triangle, which some Precalculus classes cover those 2 topics and some of them don't. Number 4, use Desmos.com. Even if your school is not a one-to-one, you can still use Desmos as a way to demonstrate particular topics and reinforce ideas. These links here on this screen will take you, some of them are for activity builders, and some of them are just regular Desmos pages to reinforce some of these ideas. So these are some of the favorites that I've used, so check them out. Tip number 5, more with technology. There are some free calculators available for your students. If your school is such that the students cannot afford to buy their own personal calculator or the school cannot provide them their own personal calculator, then these are some options. There's the Calculate 84 app available for the iPhone. There's the Graphing Calculator Plus 8483 app available for an Android device. There's a Desmos scientific calculator. There's also a Desmos matrix calculator, in addition, of course, to just your regular Desmos.com website. So if students have smartphones, then they can use some of these apps, or if they have their own personal devices, Chromebooks or laptops, then they can look at these as well. Another thing that's not mentioned on here that's been talked a lot in some of the Facebook groups is the NumWorks calculator. I don't have a link for that on here, but it's NUMWORKS. If you look into that company, and you tell them that you are a high school math teacher, they will send you one of their calculators for free. I have one. I don't use it that much because I'm so ingrained in the 84, but if you are interested, then you can get one of those for free. There's also an app that goes along with it. I've heard people really like it, and they're much more affordable than the TI calculators. Tip number 6, let's learn some tips and tricks for the TI-84. I'm going to switch my screen here for a second. So this is my TI-84 emulator software. First tip is if you teach degrees, minutes, and seconds, then you can have your calculator switch those over for you. So if I had, for example, 52.37 degrees, and I wanted to switch it to minutes and seconds, and you go under the angle menu, so second apps will get into that menu. You've got the degree symbol, the minute symbol, the symbol is for radians, and then this one is degrees, minutes, and seconds. This one for the radians means that you can be in degree mode, but still work with a radian measurement. So I choose option 4, or you can scroll down and hit 4. I just choose 4 on the keyboard and I press enter and it turns it to 52 degrees, 22 minutes and 12 seconds. If I want to go the other way around, so I can do 52, go back into the angle menu to get the degrees, and then 22, go back into the angle menu and get the minutes. Now to get the seconds, I actually going to get that off my keyboard. So if you look above the plus key in green, you've got that quote symbol. So that's it right there. So I do 12 and then alpha plus, and that'll be my minute symbol. And I press enter and it switches it back to decimal form. All right, the second tip is if you wanted to graph a function, let's do a rational function like x divided by parentheses x plus 2. Okay, that's all fine and good, but you may know that students tend to forget to use the parentheses and then they graph the wrong function. So I encourage my students to use the stacked fraction feature. So if you go to alpha y equals, you're going to get a pop-up menu here. So these correspond to the F1, F2, F3 buttons above your below the screen there. So this first one is numerator slash denominator. So I press enter and then I can type x over x plus 2. And there I can have my graph. And that's all fine and good. But when I go to my table, if I wanted to plot these points, now these decimals or these fractions are not that bad, but sometimes you get some really nasty fractions and you don't know where that is if you're trying to plot points on a piece of paper. So if you go back to y equals, and then if you put your cursor behind any number you have in your expression and just put a decimal point after it, you don't even need to put a 0 or anything behind the decimal point. Now when you go to your table, all of your output values are decimals. So that's a nice tip. The second tip, I'm going to put my calculator in polar mode, press enter, and now when I go to y equals, it now says r equals, and I'm going to graph 2 plus 3 cosine theta. You'll notice I just pushed the theta button there. The modes that you have are function, parametric, polar, sequential, and those buttons, this button here corresponds to that. So if you're in function mode, that button is going to be an X. If you're in parametric mode, it'll be a T. If you're in polar mode, it'll be a theta. In sequential mode, it'll be an N. All right, so I graph that function, and we can hit graph and look at it. It's very nice, but it's not square. Sometimes I like to go to zoom square, it's option 5, to square it up and have it look a little bit better. But what I want to do is actually plot some points. And well, if I go to my table, the default setting is going to be 1, 2, 3, 4. Well, that's 1 radian, 2 radians, 3 radians. That's really not what I want. So instead what I can do is I'll go into table settings, so second window, table settings, and just change independent to ask and leave everything else alone. Now when you go to table, it's going to be empty. And here's where I can type 0 radians, or pi over 6 radians, or pi over 4 radians. And then I can just plot those points on my polar coordinate plane. Now I'm going to get down to the bottom. I'm going to enter a few more values here. Okay, this value down here, the 3.927, that was 5 pi over 4. Now if I press another value, if I wanted to do 4 pi over 3, 4 pi over 3, then it's going to just type over it. There's not going to be any scrolling when you're in this particular setting. So what you can do if you'd like, you can just kind of scroll up here and you can just press the delete button and it will delete all your previous entries. So that's a nice tip for when you're wanting to plot a function and you know what particular input values you need. Tip number 7. Now that I've told you some technology and calculator tricks to use, I'm going to suggest that you have a non-calculator portion of your assessments, especially if they're going to take AP Calculus the following year, because there is a non-calculator portion of the AP Calculus exam. What I like to do is I like to copy the calculator portion on a different color. I give the students the non-calculator portion first, and then they turn it into me, and then I give them the calculator portion, and then which is a different color paper. And then as I glance around the room, it's pretty obvious to me that if you have like a pink color paper, then you can have your calculator out. If you have white paper, you cannot have your calculator out. So just to keep track of who is allowed a calculator and who is not. Number 8. Make some connections as you go through the course. A lot of what's covered in Precalculus is about the study of functions. So when you're talking about the definition of the function and the vertical line test, inverse function, domain range, increasing, decreasing, odd, even, every time you introduce a new type of function, polynomial, rational, exponential, logarithmic, trigonometric, for example, then you can discuss these ideas and bring it back. Every time, like what's the definition of a function? Does it pass the vertical line test? How will we find the inverse? What are the domain and range? Increasing, decreasing, that kind of a thing. Now, odd and even functions, I would definitely cover that in an honors pre-calculus class, but I don't think it's required to be covered in an on-level pre-calculus class, in my opinion. Tip number 9, practice, practice, practice. Definitely build in time for the students to collaborate with their peers and practice these topics. So here are some tips, some links to places where you can get some ideas. Board problems is something I call it board problems. It's inspired by Peter Liljedahl's book, Building Thinking Classrooms and the Vertical Non-Permanent Surfaces, #VNPS, where I put the students in random groups. I use a deck of cards, but I've also used like a random name generator from flippity.net. So I put the students in random groups. I put them around the board in the boards around my classroom and give them one marker, and then I give them a set of problems. You can read more about that if you click on that link. It's real popular with the students to the point where the students are requesting, when can we do more board problems? Because they'd rather be up at the desks, or excuse me, up at the boards rather than sitting at their desks. Another great thing to do is, and it doesn't take long, is a stand and talk from sarahvanderwerf.com. I read her blog post a few years ago and I implemented this idea and it was pretty successful. But you can click on the link. The idea is basically that I do it when I open a lesson with an idea. Like once I had a picture of some baseballs that were stacked in a pyramid, and I would say, discuss, what do you notice, what do you wonder? And it was an introduction to sequences and series. Or I might give them some functions that have an odd degree and some functions that have an even degree, and I sort them and say, what do you notice, what do you wonder? Or it could be pictures of different types of functions that you can categorize, and then see if the students can kind of come up with what did these functions have in common and what do these functions not have in common. A scavenger hunt is another thing to do to get the students working together and working around the room, and of course some review games. So you can click on those links and read more about those. Number 10, do formative assessments often. One of the best times to reinforce learning is with an assessment. I know for me this past year, my students, a lot of them were just not motivated. They were not doing their homework because we have a policy at the school to not grade homework. So they just weren't doing it. And so when you put some sort of leverage on it to say, well, I'm going to be grading this, then they tend to take it more seriously. But the truth is that formative assessments, experts will say that you should not grade them. And there are times when I don't grade them and there are times when I do grade them. And when I do grade them, they tend to be for very low stakes. For example, it could count as twice a homework. Well, at my previous school, we graded homework, so it could be counted as twice a homework grade, or sometimes I would do half of a quiz grade, or an eighth of a quiz grade, something like that. Because I wanted the students to take it seriously. I wanted them to work independently. I wanted to sort of put a little bit of pressure on them, but I didn't want it to affect their grade in a very dramatic way. So I used what I would call open note accountability quizzes, or ONACs. And as the name implies, they are open note. And they were usually just one page that would take about 15 minutes because I had students that had extended time accommodations. So I would say only 15 minutes. And then the students with the accommodations, they didn't really need any extra time. You can read more about my thoughts on formative assessments at that blog post there. All right, number 11. More about technology. Math illustrations. I love math illustrations. It's a software. It's not free, but they do have a free 30-day trial. I've used it on a Mac and on a PC. It's great if you teach geometry. So if you also teach geometry, it's a great way to create diagrams for presentations or assessments or worksheets. It's also great for creating your non-right triangles. So if you want to make your triangle look to scale, then you can draw your triangle and you can force an angle to be 37 degrees. You can force a side length to be 115, and it will show it to scale. And then you can change the colors and things like that. So I love math illustrations for making geometry type diagrams. You can also graph functions in math illustrations. But for graphing functions, I'm a fan of autographed graphing software. There is a web browser for it, or you can download it on a PC. I've been using Autograph for 20 years or so, ever since I found out about it. Not quite 20 years, 15 years. Always download it on a PC. It used to be like $300, but now it's free. It's very powerful. It's great for calculus too when you're doing like 3-dimensional like volumes of revolution. I use it for that because you can show the student, well, this is not about calculus, but anyway, it's great for calculus. Graphfree.com is kind of my current obsession. If you can learn how to make nice graphs with that as well, or just make a blank grid and put it in your worksheet. It's not as powerful as Autograph as far as the options for scale and your tick marks and things like that, but it is very good and it's free. But Autograph is also free. And then this one is not related to math so much, but planbook.com. I love planbook.com. I've been using it since 2012 because I switched from a school that had an alternating block to a rotating 7-period day. And so it's a great way for me keeping my lesson plans organized. I actually do pay out of my personal pocket for this. It's only $36 for like a 3-year subscription. And I do it out of my own pocket because I want to own my own lesson plans for if I ever change schools. And it's very easy to copy lesson plans from year to year. And my favorite thing about it is it's very easy to adjust your lesson plans if you have a snow day or a teacher absence, or suddenly 3/4 of your class is absent for whatever reason, and then you can just a couple of clicks and then it pushes everything over into the next day, and you can have some lessons that are frozen to a particular day, locked to date as they call it. So if you know that you cannot have anything on a particular Wednesday because of parent-teacher conferences are happening during the school day, you can have all your lessons adjust around a particular day. Love, love, love planbook.com. Number 12. Teaching the unit circle. This is where my freebie will come in to use. So I love the paper plate activity to teach the unit circle, and I have on here or reteach it because sometimes they've had it with their Algebra 2 teacher. I learned the paper plate activity when I was student teaching back in 98. It's always been a huge hit, and the freebie that you get with your ticket here, you get 2 free unit circle presentations, again, PowerPoint or Google Slides. There's also a link right there. If you just type that into your URL, it'll take you to the same link as you'll see at the bottom of this video. And then there's also that link there for how to teach the unit circle. So that's actually me showing you how to do the paper plate activity. Number 13, table of trig values. Have your students complete a table of trig values because this goes a real long way in reinforcing the patterns that happen in the unit circle. For example, seeing how many angles have a secant or a cosecant that is 2 or -2 or 2 or 3 over 3 or things like that. I had to do this when I was in college and I loved it, and it really helped me to understand the unit circle. You can grab my free copy of this. It's on TPT. If you click on that link there, it has the blank table as well as a completed table. Tip number 14, have props. My favorite prop, and really kind of my only prop, is to have a giant unit circle poster. You can see that smiling picture of me in front of mine. I had mine made in front in a at a local print shop. I made the unit circle in PowerPoint and on an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper. But I guess you can make it square too. And then I went in and asked them what the largest size laminator that they had, and to make the poster big enough so it could fit through the laminating machine. And the whole thing cost like $50. And I just love it. And I do take it down before assessments. Like at the beginning in Algebra 2, we let our students have access to it. But then after a while, I was like, okay, you really need to be able to create the unit circle on your own. I like to say the word memorize, but then I know that some people get real uppity about memorizing the unit circle. You just need to be able to recreate it. And that's what I mean when I say memorize it. You need to be able to recreate it. So that's why the paper plate activity is very useful, for them to come up with the radian measurements. And then there's patterns, of course. If you just know the coordinates for the first quadrant, then you can reflect them and get the coordinates for the other quadrants. But yeah, so it's useful to have up on the board or on the wall while you're teaching things related to the unit circle, so that you can refer to it, especially, for example, like the ambiguous case of the law of sines and why you have 2 different angles. You can say, well, look at the sine of 30 degrees and the sine of 150 degrees. It's the same value, and 30 and 150 are supplementary. Highly recommend that you get a large unit circle poster. And I will also say that a colleague of mine bought a unit circle poster from a website, and it's a nice sized poster, but it has way too much information on it, because on the bottom section of the poster, it also has formulas for sum and difference identities and double angle identities, and it's just too much information on the poster. It really is just not big enough to be seen from the back of the room. So check out your local print shop. Tip number 15, to memorize or not to memorize. So since I've just discussed about memorizing the unit circle, related to that, I'm not a fan of having students memorize formulas. So on the left are things that I don't make my students memorize for pre-calculus class, and on the right are things that I do make the students memorize, because if they're going to take AP Calculus, they really need to be able to pull these things out of their heads without looking at a formula sheet. Unit circle, as I already discussed. Reciprocal identities, like sine is 1 over cosecant. Quotient identities, tangent is sine over cosine. Pythagorean identities, I put a question mark by that because I personally think they should memorize the sine squared equals cosine squared equals 1 and be able to generate the other two, but I have colleagues that don't agree with that. So it's just decide for that among for yourself. And then finally, the cofunction identities, which honestly, I don't use that one a whole lot. I do discuss it, but that would be like sine of 90 minus theta is equal to cosine. And that, by the way, is why sine and cosine have that similar name, because the co comes from complementary. And so I always find that very interesting, the cofunction identities. Tip number 16, ask for help. You're going to run into cases, especially at the beginning of your time teaching a particular course, that your students will ask you a question and you cannot answer. Tell them that you don't know. Be honest with them and that you will find out. The more that you teach a course, the less often that's going to happen. And I know it can be embarrassing, but it's how you learn, and, be open and honest with your students, because if you try to fiddle your way through it and lie to them, they're going to see right through that. So also, it's okay for your students to see you make a mistake. This happens to me all the time if you're going over a homework problem that you haven't worked before, and it gives them permission to make mistakes if they see you making mistakes, and you also model for the students how to handle it when you do make mistakes. So for example, do you get really frustrated and throw your pen across the room, or you just say, oh, I'm so silly, I have to go back, or even like, this is not the answer that's in the back of the book. Where did I go wrong? Can anybody help me out? Where did I go wrong? And maybe some brave soul will say, oh, you put a negative when it should have been positive. Oh yeah, okay. So annoying when that happens. Well, let's erase and start over, If you are the only teacher at your school that is teaching these higher level math courses, it's great nowadays that you can ask for help on social media. I have a Facebook group. There's a link to it here. We have about almost 3,000 members of high school math teachers. It's particularly for Algebra 2, Precalculus, and Calculus teachers. So if you have a content question, no shame. We've all been there. If you're not sure why something is true, or how you teach this, or should you even teach it at all, come to the group, ask questions, and everybody in there is very nice. Like me. Finally, the VIP bonus resource. So if you have a VIP ticket and it's not too late to get one, this is what you can get with the VIP bonus resource. It's a brand new resource. I do not have this available in my TPT store. It's a polynomial division card sort activity. So polynomial division, students can either use synthetic division or long division, or the box method for division. And if you don't know what the box method for long division is, Google that. Actually, there is a link in the VIP bonus resource. There is a link to a YouTube video that shows you how it works. I did that this year in my Algebra 2 class. I did not teach them the long division algorithm. I only taught the box method, and it was a huge success. So in this card sort activity, the students can work in groups, or they can work individually. They can work at their desks, or maybe you can post the questions around the room and do hashtag VNPS board problems, vertical non-permanent surfaces. You can laminate them. You can use them year after year. I love a card sort activity because it's just so much more interesting than just doing a worksheet. Finally, let's keep in touch. If you want to find me, I go to my Facebook group every single day. If you send me a private message, make sure that you tag me in the group and let me know, because I don't always see the notifications that somebody that I'm not friends with wants to send me a message. I do have an Instagram account. I don't check it very often, but I do have it. And then, of course, my email address is there, Rebecca@hoffmath.com. And I hope to hear from you soon. Thanks so much.